What's going on, everybody? We're getting right into it today. We're not wasting any time. We're going to unbox these bushings for the lower control arms in the rear today, and then we're going to be slamming these bushings out right away. We're not wasting any time, getting right after it. We're going to get these cleaned up the best we can to be able to shove them in the back of my Subaru so I can take them into the shop and get them sandblasted and ready for paint. So I already cut the box open. We'll just get this stuff out of the way. I went with PowerFlex race bushings. I have the PowerFlex street bushings in the front. I kind of wish I had the race ones that they're a little bit more firm, a little more stiff, so they give a little bit better planted feeling on the ground. However, went with the street ones up front. They work great. I would recommend them to anybody. Great price and great performance. So these should be the lower outer for the rear. So that should be these two that are right on the outside edge. Look at the next box here, rear upper, inner and outer. So it should be this one and the one that goes on the top of the knuckle. Finally, the last box should say on here the rear lower inner of the wishbone. So that should be these ones right on the inside. Pretty simple, not super expensive to get these bushings. Very good bushings. Like I said, I'd recommend them to anybody. There's also similar bushings out there, other brands. You can also just get stock OEM ones from your local parts store. Those work plenty good too. They're pretty easy to get out and get new ones into them. So what I'm using to get these bushings out is a 29mm socket on a 1/2-inch drive extension. Basically just going right on the inside of the steel portion where the bushing sits. We're going to brace this a little bit and then give it a smack with a hammer. These should slide out pretty easy. If you can kind of tell right here, this one's already partially out just from all the torque and pushing on the control arms from having it towed in, ton of grip in the car. So we're gonna start with these, slam them out real quick. This should be a pretty easy job. You know, if you're using the car and driving the car regularly, these should have plenty of flex to them and they shouldn't be stuck in the control arms. There we go. There's the first one. Flip it over to the other one, and then we'll get through all the rest of them. Try and make quick work of this. For the bushings in the rear knuckles, we're gonna leave those alone for just a moment, and we're gonna focus on just getting the subframe and the lower control arm and upper control arm prepped so we can bring it in and get it sandblasted. Once that's done, we're then gonna get these bushings out, be able to start getting some sanding done on the knuckles and getting some primer put down on the subframe and the control arms. As far as getting the control arms cleaned and prepped, we don't really have to do too much with this. Mainly just have to focus on getting any oil, grease, or any type of lubricant or contaminants other than like dirt and rust off of it. You know, some of this is just some surface rust and just like dirt. That's not such a big deal. It's the other types of contaminants that really mess with sandblasting. So we can maybe do a little bit of a light brush on this, but it's not as much of a concern. Now underneath where the bushings were for the diff on the subframe, that has some like bushing grease underneath there. We're gonna get that cleaned up. That's more important to clean than this stuff. So we can basically just throw this stuff right into the back seat of the Subaru and then focus on that subframe real quick. Moving on to the subframe, I should really have a bigger brush than this, but for what we're doing, it's just a little bit. There's all this dirt and stuff crusted on the top. Basically just gonna give it a quick brush, nothing real crazy, just to break some of this stuff loose. Try and get like if there's any rubber, dust and stuff on here. And basically big chunks of dirt and or mud. Brush it off, we'll get the shop vac out maybe, or just brush it off enough, and it should be fine. As long as there's nothing real greasy and caked on, shouldn't be a problem. And there it is. That's the underside. Basically just brushed off any of the like dusty, dirty debris. Nothing super crazy under here, just had to clean up some grease right around where the bushing sits for the diff. Those weren't too bad. And then yeah, just brushed off some of the extra dirt and like ishy stuff from being at the track. And just basically 30 years worth of crusty nastiness on here. Now we're gonna get it all sandblasted. It's gonna look nice and fancy, ready to go for some paint. Let's get this thing shoved into the Subaru and get this thing off to sandblast. Ooh wee, look at that. All nice and clean, sandblasted, all the way down to bare metal. Now we can take a really good close look at this, make sure everything looks good, which I already kind of had a look at it. For a 30-year-old vehicle, it looks pretty good. However, I do have a couple of concerns about the quality control inspection from Mazda 30 years ago. There's some iffy looking welds. If you get real close, that's porosity. I can tell that. That's a little like a heat hole at the end of a weld where there was a crater. Some of this stuff though, I don't know if you can actually see that. It's like it's pitted, kind of like right here where there's not a weld. That's just pitting in the material. Now that's porosity, I can clearly tell that is. But like some of this stuff, I can't imagine all of these welds would have porosity like that is. But like some of these, I think it's just how old it is, and it's actually just, it's pitted material. So I'm gonna repair some of the stuff that I know is not a real great weld. And some of the stuff that's just some minor pitting, maybe I'll hit it with a sander real quick and see if how deep that pitting is. If it goes down more than like a 1/16 of an inch, it's probably porosity, and I'll probably grind it down farther than that and then add a new fresh weld over top of it. Just to make sure. We are putting quite a bit of stress on this subframe. We want to make sure all of these welds can last for a lot longer than they already have. It is the next day. If you can't already kind of tell what I'm gonna do for a paint booth, I'm gonna be taking my 10 by 10 foot square canopy that I take to the racetrack, wrapping plastic around it and laying some plastic on the floor, and we'll be turning it into a makeshift paint booth for these small parts that we're gonna be painting. So if you have a canopy similar to this, just know you can turn it into a paint booth just to get by. Something simple if you're doing small parts. Heck, you can even put two of them together or get a larger one and wrap the whole thing and make a makeshift paint booth for your entire car. My Miata fits underneath both of these. I have two of them, and it basically covers the whole car, so if I wanted to spray the whole car, I probably could. Not with just rattle cans though, I would actually invest in like a full sprayer. For these parts that we're doing, it's a small amount. I'm just gonna be using spray paint in a spray can. That's gonna be plenty good for what we're doing. So I have a couple more things that I gotta do to make this canopy into a paint booth. I need to take basically the excess or extra vapor barrier that I used for the garage insulation video. If you haven't seen that, I'll link that up here. We're gonna wrap that around the entire canopy and lay some on the floor so it can kind of contain some of the overspray so we're not spraying all over the place. Also, I'm gonna be putting my Sunflower propane heater in there for quite a while prior to spraying. We're not gonna leave it in there while we spray the paint. That's a fire hazard. So we're gonna get a controlled environment in there, try and get that as close to like 65 or 70 degrees as possible. I don't know if it's gonna be possible. Hopefully we can. Hopefully we can seal it enough to do that so that we're spraying in the best possible conditions. You don't wanna spray paint in like 30 degrees or below. it's not gonna cure right, it's not gonna actually stick to the material, especially metal. I've had those parts sitting inside at room temperature all night, so those should be warm enough to be able to spray. Once we're ready, we're gonna hang that up in the center of the canopy and be able to spray in a nice controlled environment. Now when we're inside of the paint booth, it's kind of dark in here, right? That's not optimal, you know, lighting for painting. You want to be able to see what you're painting. You want to see if you're missing any spots. So we're going to actually take the hanging light that's out front up here, and we're going to be able to chain that in and hang it so that there's some sort of light coming down, and then you'll be able to actually see up inside of here. I also have a couple of like battery powered lights, like tripod lights, that we'll probably put in one of the corners so that we have plenty of light in here, plenty of visibility when we're spraying these parts. Well, we're basically all ready to start getting some primer put down on these parts. The primer that I chose is a flat gray, so it should kind of maintain any type of color, your main color. If you go with like a white base or a primer, you might have a little bit more brighter color, or it might change it in, you know, that way. It's gonna brighten up your color. Or if you do like a black primer, it might actually make your color look a little darker than you want it to. So to try and maintain or keep the true color of whatever color we choose to go with, we're just going with a gray. And a flat gray should hopefully make it to where it'll stick a little better. Make sure when you go down to bare metal, you get some sort of base or like a primer on it. You can't just spray your normal color directly onto bare metal. I mean, you can, but it probably won't last very long. So we're just gonna do one nice solid coat on all of the parts, subframe, upper and lower control arms, and get this all ready for a main color. So just getting you guys a wide shot of what I got going on here. I got the light hung, and then I just used string to tie up the upper control arm, lower control arms, and then some ratchet straps to hold the subframe kind of a little lower so that we have room to spray in here. But then I can also still get underneath, maybe have a flashlight or something to be able to hit the bottom side. But then I can go all the way around the entire part, make sure everything is coated with some primer. Same with all these pieces. I can walk around, get all of it primed. Inside where the bushings go, we're only gonna get primer inside of here. We're not focusing on getting color inside of where it's gonna be a bushing, but everything else, coat of primer, and then we can do color on it. So yeah, looks really good. This should work out really well for a space for painting. Not the most ideal temperature in here. It's about 50, 55 degrees. I mean, it's better than, you know, 10 degrees. I mean, it's pretty chilly outside. It's really windy out there, so we're gonna do best we can, get a nice even coat on all of these parts, and let it sit for quite a while, and then hopefully be able to lay some other color on top, and then let this dry overnight, or at least for a day, before we start putting bushings back in it and getting stuff back in the car. Well, it is the next day after laying down the solid coat of gray primer to the parts. It's had almost 24 hours to completely dry. I ran the air purifier with the filtration system thing in this paint booth basically for like 4 or 5 hours to make sure all the fumes were pulled out and to try and control some of like the settling of any of those fumes onto the parts so it doesn't get grainy or weird. So looks pretty good for 30-year-old parts. Maybe a couple little spots that could have maybe gotten a little more paint, but just getting a base coat of some primer on it is going to be plenty good for underneath the car. And I had forgotten about these. I had to just grind them off and sand them. These tie in the front and the back of the subframe and then go up about 2 feet or so on the frame rails to kind of tie everything together. So I had to get those sanded and sprayed as well. Uppers look good. Paint booth worked out great. You know, if you're looking to do something like this, really simple for small parts, nothing super crazy, it turned out really good. It kept all the overspray from hitting the rest of the garage inside here. We're gonna end it out with that for this episode. Then we're gonna continue on in the next where we reveal the paint color. We'll spray that and continue on with some of the other components. We're gonna reset the coilovers, get those all squared away, and then I'll tear into the diff as well. I wanna break that case open and make sure everything looks solid inside there. I do change the fluid a couple of times in a year just to make sure that it's got fresh oil and stays lubricated, but just to get a good inspection after 3 years of beating on it, wanna make sure it's good. So, like I said, we're gonna end out today with that. Stay tuned for the next one where we reveal that color. Thanks for watching.